Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's program. I'm thrilled to have you join us for the second webinar in the series, Your Career in Transition. I'm Greg Stevens from Purple Cow Career and Talent Development, and I'm happy to be your host. I'm also happy to present this program and this series in collaboration with the Mid-Atlantic Association of Museums and the Virginia Association of Museums. I know several of you in the audience are MAM or VAM members, and you are most welcome. And everybody else who is not necessarily of the museum field, you are most welcome as well. We have lots of information to share with you today. Reminder, if you would, please make sure your microphones are muted and your videos are turned off throughout the program. Thank you. Of course, today is the second in our series, and today we'll be helping you rediscover your strengths, skills, and passions. I emphasize the part of discover because some of you may already know about your strengths and skills and passions, and this might be an opportunity to revisit those and refine them a little bit. And for others of you, this may be a new experience in doing a deeper dive around skills and passions. It is my great pleasure to welcome my friend and colleague, Marcia Semmel, as my special guest today. Marcia, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Great. And before we go any farther, can I please ask everybody to make sure you mute your microphones since we are recording this program? We'll continue on just one moment while I figure out who's got their microphone on here.
Whoops.
Okay, I think I got it figured out. Great. Marcia, I'm so delighted to have you join us today for this conversation about strengths and passions. You and I have had the pleasure of knowing each other and collaborating for a number of years. And so you were the right fit for this particular program. Thank you for sharing your time and expertise today.
It's just a pleasure. I've loved working with you in the past, Greg, and it's a pleasure to work with you today. I hope we're going to be providing some useful and thought-provoking ideas and responses in the many people who are taking the time to participate.
Great, and we have a full crowd today. For those of you who were joining us with Wendy Luke on Tuesday, and I know there are many of you who have registered for the entire series, you might recall that we started that program with a series of images to help you define where you might be in terms of your thoughts or feelings about your career disruption. And by career disruption, that may be in between jobs. You may have been recently furloughed or recently laid off. You may be a graduate of a college or university and just now looking to get into whatever field you're interested in. And what we identified in that program on Tuesday was that everybody's feeling a variety of things right now. Some people are really quite fine going down a path. Others are fairly despondent, or a couple of folks said they were feeling hopeless, perhaps directionless. Some people feeling quite reflective, and some people really unsure and anxious about the future. So we want to just reinforce what we talked about last time. You'll recall we posted this cartoon from Gary Larson and to reflect the disruption that we're in the middle of right now, and that this thing seemed to have landed on us from left field. You might also remember that Wendy Luke last Tuesday talked about the stages of grief, and we explored that many of you are on various points of this continuum, and that's entirely okay. And Wendy also talked about VUCA. She introduced the concept of VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today with Marcia. Today's program will start with an overview or a contextualization of this uncertain world we live in, this VUCA world. We're going to talk a little bit about what we've identified as some of the essential skills and competencies for the workplace as we move into the third decade of the 21st century. And throughout the program, we're going to ask you to do some self-reflection and brainstorming about your own strengths, skills, and passions. So get your thinking caps on and have a pad of paper and a writing instrument with you. To get us started in our program today, we'd love for you to type into the chat box, without thinking too much about it, 3 things you're good at. So just very quickly, think about 3 things you're particularly good at and type them into the chat box. For me, I might type in, I'm good at gardening, cooking, and making projects happen. Marcia, what might your 3 things be?
Well, I was just thinking, I'm good at applesauce, doing jigsaw puzzles, and taking long walks.
Terrific. All right, so if you all would just take a moment and type something into the chat box, and let's see what comes out of it.
All right. Relaxing, problem solving, baking, organizing, public speaking, problem solving, seeing the big picture, cooking quickly. I think these people got it.
Great, great.
Making things happen, connecting people.
I love that. That's one of my skills too.
That's one of mine too. I have a picture of a switchboard operator right over my desk.
Absolutely. I feel like that's one of my strengths as well, is connecting people and ideas to make something happen.
And I love, go ahead. I'm sorry, Greg.
No, great. So keep your comments coming in, and as you do so, we're going to move along with our program a little bit. And I'm going to turn the stage and to Marcia, who's going to help contextualize the VUCA world that we're living in that Wendy Luke presented to us last week. Marcia.
Yes. I first learned this phrase VUCA from a fellow at the Institute for the Future in Palo Alto who published a book in 2009 called Leaders Make the Future, 10 New Leadership Skills for an Uncertain World. And as Wendy described Tuesday, the concept comes from the military, but it has migrated into many other domains. Bob Johansen is the person who wrote that book. And the way he defined the VUCA, as you see, volatile, the environment demands you react quickly to ongoing changes that are unpredictable and out of your control. Uncertain, you have to take action without certainty as to whether your actions will have the desired or even the most beneficial consequences. Complex, the environment is dynamic with many interdependencies, and ambiguous. The environment is unfamiliar. As Bob Johansen described the world he was writing about in 2009, he talked about certain disruptions. He talked about not only are we hyper connected, but we've got constantly changing organizational structures, various movements, various connections, and various disruptions. For example, he then in 2008-9 described food as a flashpoint for rich-poor conflict. Financial disruption, remember coming out of the recession of 2008. Climate change, ocean dead zones. And in fact, in his book, he has a map of what he called the Katrina diasporas, all the unanticipated population moves that happen in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. Three things, though, he said about VUCA. One, the VUCA world will get worse in the future. Two, that VUCA presents us not just with dangers, but with many opportunities. And three, that in order to make the most of the opportunities of the VUCA world, we need new skills. And that's what we're going to talk about today, some of these new skills. When he talked about the challenges and problems, he spent some time defining different types of challenges and problems, because as I'm sure you all know, you'll need different skills to handle the problem. So I like to think about problems in some different ways. So here's a little chart, a simple problem, baking a cake. You can either buy the cake mix and add the eggs and water and follow the recipe on the cake mix, or even if you start from scratch. Once you get the ingredients together, follow the cookbook instructions, you're liable to, maybe it'll take more than one try, but you're liable to have an edible cake. A more complicated problem, sending a rocket to the moon, has many more steps than baking a cake and relies on many more people and many more moving parts. But once you develop the expertise and assemble it, you should have a blueprint and a set of steps that will enable you to achieve success. However, once you move into complex problems, and the example here is raising a child, maybe I wouldn't say that's a problem as much as a dilemma that many people have and enjoy. I certainly have enjoyed child raising. But as this diagram says, there is no rigid protocol. There really is no cookbook. There is some expertise, but every child is unique and has to be understood as an individual. You can't separate the parts from the whole. The essence exists in the relationship between different people, different experiences, and different moments in time. And then there is...
Well, Marcia, before you go on, I'm thinking about these simple, complicated, and complex problems, and listening to a number of my colleagues and friends and the challenges they're facing right now, working from home, multiple people working in the same space, people having their children at home because schools are closed. So a lot of complexity happening in the world right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's calling on some new skills for all of us, not just as we think about our careers, but as we're thinking about our day-to-day routines and managing life. So even more intractable in some ways, or challenging, are wicked problems. And I would venture to say that every single person in this conversation, recognizes this image. We probably wouldn't have recognized this image in January, but I think we all recognize it now. And these wicked problems are even more difficult. And Greg, why don't you, the next image is a kind of compendium of the qualities of wicked problems, like the COVID-19 virus. They're never completely solved. There's no clear problem definition. There are multiple stakeholders with conflicting agendas, which I know we are all experiencing, whether it's within our city, our state, our country, on the local or national level, even within our community, and maybe even within our families. The solutions are not yet known. They straddle organizational, disciplinaries, and now, of course, geographic boundaries. We don't know what the solution is, even with all the expertise that we have and the expertise and history and experience that we've had only goes so far in helping us address and solve the problem. So those are just some of the aspects of wicked problems. Rick.
Marcia, thanks so much for putting all of this in context. And folks, Marcia and I thought about the appropriate way to introduce the idea of exploring or re-exploring your strengths and skills and passions. And we thought that revisiting the VUCA world and the complexity of problems we all face was an important backdrop for this conversation. So before we go into the next section, I would love it if you would take out your pad of paper and pen or pencil. And knowing that many of you on an online program are likely to multitask or doodle, here's an opportunity to do some purposeful doodling, some focused, intentional doodling. And your doodling is to make a list, or actually two lists. One is a list of all the things you're good at, and the other list is all the things you're passionate about. And as you explored earlier on, just with your quick brainstorming, we're all good at many things. So just start brainstorming and think about it. It could be anything from gardening, painting, cooking, managing data, managing people, putting things together, whatever it might be. Just do a quick brainstorm as we go through our program. And then write a list of all the things you're passionate about. I happen to be good at organizing stuff, packing. I'm a great packer at skills. I'm good at gardening. I'm pretty good at cooking, but especially I'm good at magic food, which is when you go into the refrigerator and the freezer and there's nothing there, and then somehow you manage to make something for dinner, and I call that magic food. I'm good at seeing patterns. I'm good at connecting people. I'm good at teaching and facilitating programs. I'm good at painting and design and decorating. And I'm passionate about art and connecting people and cooking. I'm passionate about wine. I'm passionate about education. I love bridges. I love architecture. I love gardens and music, and I love creating something new. So that's my brainstorming that I did just this morning when I got up and was having coffee. So I'd like you to doodle your lists as we go through the rest of our program. What I'd like to talk about now is skills and competencies in the context of this VUCA world that Marcia just described. Over the last several days, Marcia and I have been collaborating and combing through various sites and looking for the skills and competencies that are being articulated, not just in the third decade of the 21st century, but more specifically in the midst of this pandemic, this career disruption that many of our colleagues are facing. And some of the sources we looked at were Harvard Business Review, LinkedIn Learning, Forbes, Fast Company, the Institute of Services, the Society for Human Resource Management, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the National Association of Colleges and Employers. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these because we don't have time, but I will pull up a quick set of the skills and competencies that each of these four organizations have identified. The National Association of Colleges and Employers, LinkedIn Learning, Fast Company, and Forbes. What Marcia and I would like you to do at this moment, and I won't read all of these, but take a moment for yourself and start scanning for things that you see repeated, looking for patterns, looking for themes. And as you identify those themes, jot those down on your notepad as well. And then type those patterns or themes into the chat box so we can all see together what you've all arrived at as the patterns and themes. So take a moment to read through these lists, jot down some patterns, and then type those patterns into the chat box. And we'll come back in just about a moment. All right, Marcia, what are we seeing as patterns from our colleagues in the audience?
Well, we've got a lot teamwork, critical thinking, oral written communication, flexibility and problem solving, emotional intelligence, analytical thinking, critical thinking, creativity, data. A lot of good comment. A lot of these do span the various sources of these skills. Tech skills.
Great. Yep, communication, teams, critical thinking. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of those. So terrific. Thank you all for being so thoughtful about that quick exercise. This is going to be really important for you all, not only for this particular program, but what you end up doing with this information afterwards. So if we think about what we've talked about, the VUCA world, the problems, the complex problems we're facing, and competencies that have been identified across a variety of organizations and that you all just created patterns from. A little bit of a drill down before we move on is looking at a couple of sites like the National Association of Colleges and Employers. This happens to be from a report that they did on career readiness related to competencies. And in this report, the organizations that responded indicated that these are the top competencies that they're looking for: professionalism, work ethic, critical thinking and problem solving, oral and written communications, teamwork and collaboration, information technology, leadership, career management. So this is just one organization's report. This particular report comes from the Society of Human Resource Management. And what they're looking at here is missing skills, both technical skills and soft skills. On the left-hand side, you'll see what they've identified as some of the missing skills, like trade skills, which may or may not apply to you folks in the audience. But right there in the middle, data analysis, so data fluency, data literacy, right in the middle. And some of you may be in the science, engineering, or medical fields. Because I know we have a lot of museum folks, but we have a lot of folks who are not in the museum field as well. And then over here on the right-hand side, you'll see the top 3 missing soft skills, as they call them, which is a pretty typical term, although I think the soft skills are equally as essential as the hard skills or the technical skills. And I see, Marcia, you nodding in agreement. But there you are. Problem solving, critical thinking, innovation, and creativity tops the chart here in this report. And you all got that in your chat responses. Right there in the middle, the ability to deal with complexity and ambiguity. Marcia just described this VUCA world that is all about complexity and ambiguity. And what we're seeing is that employers need to see those skills in the people they want to hire. And down there at the bottom of the list, but not too far down, is communication of all sorts: oral, written, being able to write a report, being able to stand up in front of people, being able to engage with people you don't know well, being able to work on a team. Marcia, anything that you would add to this before we move on?
Yeah, I would. We just got a chat from Wendy Luke, who said people who've done a lot of work throughout many sectors. People often get hired for their hard skills and fired for the lack of soft skills. And I would argue that is probably more true than ever. Thanks, Wendy.
Yes, thanks, Wendy. So these being side by side, the hard skills and the soft skills, for me, I think is an appropriate placement because they do go hand in hand.
And, you know, the only other thing I'd say is that the more we're learning about the neuroscience of learning, we're learning that social and emotional skills in throughout formal education are more and more important and determining factors in even academic success.
Absolutely, which is a great way to this slide, which is familiar territory for you, Marcia. The Institute of Museum and Library Services report on museums, libraries, and 21st century skills. That, if I'm not mistaken, it was published in 2009.
Yes.
and you were the lead on this project. So I'm going to let you take over from here and talk about this for a moment.
Well, this was when I was the director for strategic partnerships at IMLS, and when I was that that job required me to really turn outward, not just look at museums and libraries, but look at adjacent fields and see what they were talking about, especially in terms of learning. And what I saw throughout the corporate world, the formal education world, the social service world, was this emphasis on 21st century skills. And what I didn't see was anyone writing about how museums and libraries are ideal places to foster and promote 21st century skills, like the ones you see on the screen to the right of the screen. So with the approval of our advisory board and the other people at the agency, we worked with a task force of leaders in museums and libraries, and with a group that was involved with 21st century skills in K-12 learning. And we came up with this report. So the report was initially, hey, the rest of the world, museums and libraries are really important places for 21st century skills. But it was also turning inward, and it was a kind of document that we hoped would be taken up by museums and libraries, and in the hopes that they could sharpen their skills and sharpen their strategic focus and learn a little bit about how to do and promote and foster these skills even more effectively. So we have some examples. We had some examples of case studies in the publication.
Well, what I love most about this report, and I use it and have used it for years with the various courses and workshops that I lead, is that these skills that your group identified back over a decade ago are very much in alignment with the skills and competencies we've just talked about that are needed for our colleagues going into, who are in the midst of career disruption and might be thinking about how to recraft themselves. So these skills line up pretty terrifically.
Well, and I'm looking at it, if you wouldn't mind going back just one more second, Greg, I'm looking at it with new eyes when I see things like civic literacy and health literacy and environmental literacy. There are some chats, requests for getting, there is no more hard copy of this, but if you go to the IMLS website, you can download a PDF, and we'll put the link in the resources for the entire group, okay?
Absolutely. Well, there's a number of links that we plan on sharing, but as Marcia, this report is available on the IMLS website as a PDF. So I really encourage you to take a closer look at it when you have a chance. And Kat, I see you're asking about the program being recorded. Yes, this program is being recorded, and we will share the link to that recording probably early next week. So this is a good segue into an article, Marcia, that you will recall. When I was the Director of Professional Development at the American Alliance of Museums, I asked if you would write an article for Museum Magazine on skills for leaders at all levels, with the notion that leaders aren't just the directors or the managers or the CEOs, but that we all are leaders depending on where how we see ourselves in the organization. And in this article, you identified 6 skills for leaders at all levels. So I wonder if you would take our colleagues through a quick walk through these 6 skills.
I'd be happy to, Greg. I left the Institute for Museum and Library Services in 2013, and I went to work for the Noyce Foundation, which had a global leadership program for science and technology center leaders and children's museum leaders. So I kind of sharpened my leadership chops even more by the privilege of being part of that program. So in trying to do a kind of short synopsis of some of the skills I felt were most important, especially, but not exclusively in the museum sector. We came up with these 6 skills, and I'll go through them one by one.
And as Marcia goes through these 6 skills, we'll be sharing this worksheet with you momentarily. But as you go through, we'd love for you to think about the skills you currently possess in any one of these areas, the strengths and skills you currently have. Later on, we're going to ask you to look at this whole worksheet and think about the skills you need to build on or improve and how you might go about doing so. But for the moment, as Marcia goes through these 6 skills, just concentrate on those skills and strengths that you currently have.
Thanks, Greg. And just as another comment relating to that, these are not necessarily skills that are taught in your formal education experience, or maybe not even in your professional experience. And that's where take a broad view of all of the different roles and learning settings that you've had in your life when you think about some of these skills. Some of this I have a museum director friend who swears by his experience as the leader of a soccer team in college, and that prepared him for a lot of his work that he does today. So I don't think, given the those other skill lists we saw before, that these are going to be a big shock to you, but I hope that they resonate. So the first one is strategic agility, continuous learning. How can you, in this VUCA world, pivot when necessary? How can you consider many possibilities? How can you avoid rushing to judgment and getting to a final conclusion before you think outside the box? How can you think about embracing change, even though for some of us that's not as natural an inclination as for others? That's the first one, strategic agility. The second one is getting personal. And for those of you who had the good fortune of hearing Wendy Luke and getting some of her exercises on Tuesday, one of her emphases was on being aware of yourself, not only your mind and your feelings, but literally your body, your posture, your breathing. I think self-awareness is more critical than ever. It helps provide you with energy and understanding of not only your strengths, but where and how you can use some help. And that goes very closely to the relationship of you with others. So now more than ever, and I think about us all in very unusual circumstances and environments these days, the importance of listening, of patience, of empathy, not only in your professional setting, but in your family, with your neighbors. I think one of the leadership qualities that is extraordinarily important right now is trust and building trusted relationships with your colleagues. And another key element of leadership that involves the personal is being in touch with your authentic self and being your authentic self with others. Sometimes that moves to being your vulnerable self with others. And the others, again, can be people in your personal circle, but increasingly, as those of us who are most familiar with, as I am, with museums and libraries, it is providing authentic experiences and even customized experiences with your public. So it's understanding your publics, and in some cases, even co-creating programs with your audiences.
And Marcia, I want to interject here, and I dropped this image into this slide of some of the many wonderful colleagues and friends that I have, and I've had the fortune of my career. So not just slide decoration, but really to illustrate the power of these long relationships, trusting relationships with colleagues, including you and Wendy Luke, who I know is in the audience.
Yeah, and you know what? Those relationships can't help but serve you well. You know, they can lead you in unexpected places at unexpected times. And we, you know, most of us, we grew up mastering content, right? In my case, it was art history. So, you know, I did my master's thesis and I knew a whole lot, especially about French 19th century art. And one of the lessons I learned from my Noyce experience was a phrase that our director used: connect before content. And I became more and more aware of the importance of EQ in the intelligence, the emotional quotient, as much as the IQ. So here, Daniel Goleman, who's been a major leader and thinker about emotional intelligence, developed this particular chart, which talks about all of these different and important and related dimensions of emotional intelligence. Yeah, so let's move to the next one. We've got a couple more to do here. So related to all this is communication, communication, communication. And again, if we are now in a teleworking, or if we are in isolated environments, we need to remind ourselves that communication includes what you see. And of course, now increasingly we're not even seeing our colleagues, but what you don't see. And especially in a time of uncertainty, what people's fears are, what their other constraints are, what their anxieties are. And we need to be aware of that if we're going to be effective as leaders. John Cotter, who's a wonderful theoretician of change, says, without credible communication, and a lot of it, the hearts and minds of the troops are never captured. Let's move on to the next one. So a lot of you, when you saw the charts that we showed from all these different sources, most of you picked up on this issue of data fluency, data literacy. What that means is not only thinking about what you're measuring and how you're measuring it, but then analyzing what that means and having more than if you have an evaluation specialist in your museum, working with that person to think about what you've learned from your data. And I believe data is not just quantitative, it's also qualitative. So the importance of benchmarking, evaluating, and sharing.
And Marcia, I would interject that for some of our colleagues, even the word data is terrifying. It connotes a skill set that they may not think they have. So I think your point about this not just being qualitative, but quantitative, but qualitative as well. For example, I see patterns everywhere. So I see connections, pulling information.
Oh, Greg? I don't know, we might have lost Greg. I just wanted to, he was talking about qualitative data. I wanted to also say that you don't have to generate all your own data. There are data sources around your community, the economic issues in your community, the demographic natures, specifics of your community. You don't have to reinvent wheels. If you're really interested in making a difference, look at some existing and trusted data sources. Especially those that often your community foundation will have about your service area. Want to move on, Greg? Yes, and again, one of the ways you collect data and one of the ways you can take small steps in this VUCA world is by trying things out. It's by trying things out in your museum or your workplace or your organization. It's also trying things out with yourself. What are, Wendy talked about small steps. What are things you might experiment with about yourself and your own next career ventures that are low cost, that are a safe risk, that might take you on a whole new route. So I love the quote, a prototype is worth 1,000 meetings. And the last skill is systems leadership, or seeing the big picture. And I think that's extremely important as we learn so much of the world today. So many of the issues and challenges that we're facing are they're bigger than a single individual. They're bigger than a single department in a museum or any other organization. They're bigger than the single organization. I like to say no museum is an island. No organization is an island. And if you really are about making a positive change, both for your life and in the world, you have to think about looking at a big picture. So, especially in this uncertain world. And there's a whole lot written about systems thinking and systems leadership. And unfortunately, again, in this uncertain world, linear solutions, linear thinking, that's only going to get you so far. It's going to help you with the cake, and it might help you plant a bush, but it's not necessarily going to help you figure out the next step for you in your life. It's not even going to help museums, I think, figure out their future.
Thanks, Marcia. And I wanted to revisit this slide, and folks who know me well know that this has been a philosophy of practice for many, many years, and I share it with my students and I share it with my colleagues and clients. And the idea behind this in the context of systems leadership is that we as individuals operate on our own, but we are all part of systems within our institutions, in our departments, in our teams, in our project teams, to support our institutions in being the best they can be. And we also have the opportunity to build community and communities as part of a broader system. In our case, it's the museum field, but you may come from another field where there is a similar kind of community building that takes place. And of course, in the museum field, we talk often about communicating why museums are essential in our society and making that case to people who make decisions about museums. So I see all of this as part of a system as well. I want to do a quick revisit to this worksheet that I will share with you in a link at the end of our program. But as Marcia went through those skills, hopefully you had an opportunity to write down a few skills that you possess in each one of these particular areas. So if you feel so inclined to share with us in the chat box any of these skills in any particular area that you want, we would love for you to do that. And if you're not comfortable doing that, that's fine also. But just take a couple of moments to reflect on your notes that you've jotted down and see what you might want to share in the chat box. I do want to go back to the lists that you started on your notepad, if you indeed started one, to think about the things that you're good at and the things that you're passionate about. And think about what Marcia just shared in terms of those 6 skills or those skill areas, and also in the context of the skills and competencies we identified. What I here are a couple of lists from a colleague of mine with whom I did a similar exercise as what I just asked you to do in terms of making a list of things that I'm passionate about and things that I'm good at. And this is the list that my colleague came up with. So I'll give you just a second to scan through this. I won't read all of them. But as I looked at these lists, my first inclination was, because I'm good at seeing patterns and connecting things, my first inclination was to see patterns within each list. So maybe for your lists, you start seeing patterns of things that seem to belong together. and then looking at patterns that exist across these lists. So the list of what I'm passionate about and the list of what I'm good at, where are their connections? Where can I connect the dots? So in this case, I've gone ahead and connected some of the dots for you so you can get a visual sense of what I'm thinking. Looks a little bit like red spaghetti, but for the moment, just go with it. So one of the first patterns I looked at was my colleague being interested in reading and discovering new authors, which Marcia, you and I talked about, demonstrating curiosity, of course, but it also has to do with research and writing and creating policies and procedures. My colleague interested in and passionate about research and looking up information and using that to and formulas. I was particularly interested in my colleague's passion for jigsaw puzzles, crossword puzzles, and word searches, which I thought was a terrific pairing with organization, putting things in order, figuring things out, breaking things down to make them happen. Marcia, what is your first reaction when you see some of these items on these lists?
Well, I do see curiosity. I also see, I see a lot about continuous learning, whether it's the travel or social services. I mean, there's a lot of curiosity here. There's also a lot that's about beauty. And there's a lot about connection with, whether it's with animals or offering advice to colleagues and friends and being responsive. So those are a few of the things that you hadn't circled, but I think are important when you think about some of the emotional intelligence we were talking about as well.
Absolutely. So folks, I encourage you, with whatever your lists end up looking like, on a scribbled on a notepad or typed up on a Word document or in a spreadsheet, whatever you need to do, I encourage you to make these lists and then look for the patterns, the connective tissue across them. And as you're doing so, revisit some of these skills and competencies that we talked about before and which you already created some patterns. So think about the patterns that you arrived at from these lists, then look at your skills list and your passions list, putting them together and see where there's a fit and where there might not be a fit. In this case, this is where this worksheet might be a useful tool for you, or some other tool similar to it, in which you're able to identify those skills that you currently have, the skills that you might need to build or improve, how you can go about building them. And for me, maybe most importantly, beyond your own self-discovery, is getting some clarity about how all of this aligns with the kind of work you want to do, whether it's in museums or another field. So as I said, we'll be sharing that link with you.
And I would just add, don't despair if you don't put a big, X in every single one of these skills columns. This is not about being a super person. This is about a little more awareness and also drawing on things you do in different parts of your life. So,
right. And it's not a test.
Yourself.
It's not a test. You're not going to turn it in to get a grade. It's for your own discovery and use. And I did just paste a link to my Dropbox folder that has this worksheet and also Marcia's article on 6 skills for leaders at all levels. I want to revisit a notion that Wendy Luke shared with us and introduced on Tuesday, and that is the notion of Kaizen. And being able to take small steps for big impact. I would love to find out from you all in the chat box, what small step will you take today based on what we've. So just take a second and think about one thing you can do, whether it's working on a list or doing some research online about skills and competencies, whatever it is for you that makes sense for you. And as you're doing so, we're going to go ahead and open up the chat box. And if you do have any questions or comments, we have a few minutes. So please feel free to reach out to me and to Marcia with some questions or comments. I see Jen, you're going to fill in the chart. Samuel, you're going to make your lists. Great. Love it.
Keep working on my journal article. I've got one of those to work on too, Pixel 4.
Indeed. Indeed. Do
Yeah.
some online coding practice. Absolutely. That's a great technical skill. Develop a list of existing skills.
Good.
Yeah.
And be kind to yourself. Please write that in.
Absolutely. Be kind to yourself. One of the things that Marcia and I talked about, and Wendy, Luke, and I talked about as well, and I firmly believe this, we so often focus on the things we're not good at, which is not healthy in any circumstance, but especially when the world is swirling around us and we're dealing with a lot of issues. Now's the time for us to be more affirming with each other and remind ourselves of the strengths and skills and passions that we do have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love the reconnect with some colleagues. I have been taking time, I've tried every single day to reach out to a couple of people from whom I've not been as in touch with, and it's really been rewarding. It's just, even when I don't hear from them immediately, I feel so much better.
Absolutely. I have felt more connected with my colleagues and friends in the last 6 weeks, maybe through Zoom, maybe through phone, but it's kind of remarkable. It's not the same thing as being there in person, but it is definitely connecting with folks.
And I love Christine, true to myself. I have to say, I've had a couple of revelations in the last couple of weeks that have been really life impacting for me. So it's never too late.
And as you all continue to write your comments into the chat box, you'll see that I just pulled up a feedback poll. I would love it, and Marcia would love it as well, if you would take a couple of moments to provide your feedback about this program. I know we covered a lot. We went from 30,000 foot talking about the VUCA world in which we live. We talked about skills and competencies that have been identified across a range of sources. We talked about some very specific skills that are needed in today's workplace. We gave you a couple of exercises to think about your own skills and strengths and passions. What did I miss? Did we miss anything, Marcia?
No, I think you covered everything we covered. I was just thinking we went from the world to a cell of the virus. So that was from the macro to the micro.
We definitely did.
And I love the full moon. Yes, it's a full moon tonight.
Oh, it is full moon, indeed. Leslie, I love what you've said here. Find a way to project my uniqueness. For those of you who are registered for other webinars in the series, I just want to remind you of the programs we've got coming up. The next one is Powering Up Your Personal Brand. And we're going to talk about how you take all the things that you've identified, your strengths and skills and passions, and how you start framing those and shaping those to communicate to others, whether it's communicating online through your LinkedIn profile, or communicating through a cover letter, or communicating in an interview, or just communicating in a professional environment, either in person with your colleagues, or as we are all doing right now, virtually with our colleagues. So if you haven't had a chance to register for Tuesday's program on Power Up Your Personal Brand, please do so. And of course, we have the rest of the series running through May. Marcia, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being with me today and working with me on this program. It's a treat to collaborate with you.
Ditto. Again, I think this underscores the importance of relationships. And I thank you for giving me this opportunity, Greg. And I hope that this was, that some of this resonates with those of you who took time out from your busy days and unusual days to join us for this hour.
Great. And my gratitude, of course, to you, Marcia, and to all of you for sharing time with us. As Marcia pointed out, we know you may have other things to do, or you may have nothing else to do, depending on your circumstance. So we hope that this was a useful bit of time to share with us. I'll keep the poll open, the feedback poll, for a couple of moments, if you wouldn't mind. If you haven't had a chance, that would be great. But in the meantime, thank you for joining us for this series. And thank you to the Mid-Atlantic Association of Museums and the Virginia Association of Museums for being great hosts for this program.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.